I know myself well. Okay, great. Mark, I'm going to turn it to you to just get us started off tonight.
Sure. Right. I hope everybody can hear us. So if anybody can't, maybe just put something in the chat or a hands up. Yeah, just welcome back to Sarah, and thank you very much for putting on this series. It's been amazing. I've had so much good feedback, and yeah, I'm really excited to listen to what you have to say about the presentation tonight. So just on behalf of the clinic, just a very warm welcome and to all our patients. Um, Again, just put things in the chat and we'll try and get to them. We just ask that you be kind and respectful to one another if people ask questions, which is pretty much standard. Everybody's always done that, but I just have to say that. So I'm going to turn it over to Madeline and Sarah. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I just put a little note in the chat that just take note if you have more questions you're looking to follow up with Dr. Sarah afterwards, just take note of her website that's on the slide right now. And so, yeah, welcome, Sarah. We're in the fourth week of the gut health. And I know I've learned a lot, and just from getting the feedback and the questions, I can see that people are really gaining a lot from your talk. So and the importance of it. So it makes me wonder why we didn't do this a year ago. But anyways, here we are. So really looking forward to tonight, the role of nutrition in chronic pain management, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice hello out there to everyone. It's nice to see so many people here again tonight. So thank you so much. Yeah, the website I do update as often as I can for additional webinars and things like that. So I'm always happy to do those. And if you just pop on there periodically, we'll have some more websites. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the role of inflammation in terms of how it can contribute to chronic pain and actually propagate chronic pain. We're going to talk about some of the mechanisms linking nutrition and chronic pain briefly. And then I want to talk about some strategies that we can use from nutrition standpoint that may be helpful in mitigating or being part of a chronic pain management strategy. So if we think about nutrition being a contributing factor to chronic pain, this really is quite an emerging area. We know that the relationship between chronic pain, inflammation, and metabolism is linked in a number of different areas in the literature, in both cancer and non-cancer pain. And a variety of dietary interventions have been undertaken across many, many different types of pain syndromes, looking at systemic inflammation, immune system regulation, and even how the gut microbiome can affect pain-related pathways and mechanisms. Having said that, chronic pain is a complex scenario, and nutrition can often be very complex. And so it's not surprising that the research between chronic pain and nutrition is complicated and at times ambiguous. And so hopefully we can wade through a little bit of that tonight and shed some light on that. But certainly it's an emerging area, and I think that we'll continue to see a lot more research emerge over the next few years. So we know that diet can trigger pain in a number of different ways, and these are just a few examples. So we know, for example, that there are a number of dietary triggers in irritable bowel syndrome and chronic abdominal pain. People with chronic migraines often have food triggers. Arthritis can be triggered by a pro-inflammatory diet. And then we talked a little bit about medication side effects last week, and pain medications that can have an impact on nutrition in and of themselves. So we don't often think about nutrition and drug interactions, but in fact, there are a number of nutrients that interact with different medications that can change chronic pain management. So certainly, they're linked in a number of different ways. And yes, absolutely, the gut-brain axis is certainly very important. The gut health is linked to chronic pain, although in a slightly different way than I think that what we're talking about here tonight in terms of nutrition specifically. Other chronic pain conditions, such as rheumatoid arthritis, for example, have been associated with lower micronutrient intake. Fibromyalgia has been associated with obesity and overweight, high nutrient intake, and a pro inflammatory diet. So, I think the important thing to remember is that different types of pain are related to different types of nutritional factors. And so, as we go along, it's important to keep that in mind, because I know some of you will have pain related to different disease states or different organ systems. And so the specific recommendation around nutrition for each of those is going to be slightly different depending on the literature. Nutrition and diet behaviors in particular have been associated with a number of different factors. And so malnutrition and nutrient deficiencies, including vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, do have a role in propagating chronic pain, in the sense that quite often those can impact pain pathways. So magnesium would be a good example here, where a magnesium deficiency, for example, can be associated with worsening of certain types of neuropathic pain.
Wow.
And so malnutrition is certainly one end of the spectrum, and overnutrition is the other end of the spectrum. And they're both actually very important when we think about chronic pain. So, for example, about 2% of patients with established chronic pain are known to be underweight. And malnutrition is associated with increasing frailty, with disability, and with reduced life expectancy. Overnutrition, the opposite end of that spectrum, is also known to contribute through a variety of mechanisms to chronic pain. And so when we think about nutrition, we don't just think about micronutrients, we think about macronutrients or calorie density, which also actually really matters. And about 25% of patients with chronic pain have higher body weights, obesity, or overweight, which has been associated through a couple of different mechanisms with increased pain. So the prevalence of a higher body weight is higher in the chronic pain population. And we also know that ratings of pain severity tend to be higher when we have a higher body weight. And this is felt to be through two different mechanisms. One of them is through increased mechanical stress. So if we think about the extra wear and tear on our joints, for example, that increased body weight is known to increase mechanical stress on joints, but also through systemic inflammation, because we know that there's more inflammation in fatty tissue. So it tends to be a very pro-inflammatory scenario. And we know that chronic systemic inflammation is very important in its contribution to central sensitization. And there seems to be quite a close relationship between inflammation and chronic pain. We also know that that in underweight scenarios, that patients with chronic pain tend to have more frailty and disability, and are more often likely to have specific nutrient deficiencies. And this is probably best studied in cancer pain and chronic pain that occurs after cancer therapy, partly because this may activate the immune system and again result in a pro-inflammatory state and nervous system hypersensitivity as a consequence of that. So a number of different diet patterns over time have been associated with chronic pain. And we see that in general, in chronic pain, patients tend to have higher intake of calories, added sugar, saturated fats, sodium, and caffeine compared to recommendations which is true for the general population, but it is a little bit higher in the chronic pain scenario than even in the general population. We also see lower intakes, interestingly, of fruits and vegetables, antioxidant type vitamins and micronutrients in those who have chronic pain. And the longer we live with pain, it seems that some of these dietary patterns actually seem to get even worse and are more difficult. And there's a variety of reasons that can occur. It may be related to the pain itself. Some of it is a coping strategy. For example, we know when we have more pain, we don't sleep as well, and often for sleep we tend to reach for foods that are more satiating or give you more of a hit, like high fat foods and saturated fats and caffeine and things like that. So in general, we know that the dietary intake pattern in those who experience chronic pain is not as optimal as we would recommend, and certainly different from the general population. So, how does nutrition potentially impact chronic pain? And the interaction really is one that's bidirectional. So, nutrition impacts pain, and pain impacts nutrition. I think it's important to remember that because they really go back and forth. And for some of us, it can be really quite a vicious cycle. So there are a number of different mechanisms that I alluded to in chronic pain and linking nutrition. The primary one is the role of inflammation, and we know that certain dietary factors can promote and others can reduce chronic inflammation, which really is a key driver in a lot of chronic pain pathophysiology or the development of chronic pain. We also know that nutrient intake can influence the pattern and production of neurotransmitters, which are involved in pain perception and pain modulation. The role of oxidative stress or the development of free radicals is associated with chronic pain conditions. And of course, we've talked a lot over the past couple of weeks around the role of the gut microbiome and gut health in terms of having an impact on the gut-brain axis, the health of the brain and the nervous system, and hence chronic pain. So oxidative stress and inflammation really, oxidative stress is defined as an increase in the number of reactive oxygen species, which occur as a byproduct of oxygen metabolism. And reactive oxygen species have been shown to accumulate in immune cells and then trigger inflammation. And we know that diets that are generally poor in quality can induce increased oxidative stress, which may further perpetuate and propagate that inflammatory cycle. Whereas a diet that's very rich in antioxidants has the ability to help to alleviate some of this pro-oxidant or inflammatory state, and that has been shown to have improvements in musculoskeletal pain, for example. And of course, the gut-brain axis, which we spent quite a bit of time talking about in the last few slides, or the last few talks, is relevant here because we know that the gut microbiome has a significant bidirectional interaction with both the gut and the brain, and that this can result in dysregulation of pain physiology, essentially, through its impacts on the central nervous system. So there are a number of different mechanisms as well related to disturbed glucose metabolism. So we know that, for example, when we have altered glucose metabolism in diabetes, for example, we're more likely to have chronic pain, and that poorly controlled diabetes can then further exacerbate musculoskeletal pain. So certainly altered glucose metabolism is important in that sense. It may also result in more insulin resistance and again, oxidative stress. And there are a variety of nutrition interventions that have been used including a low carb or ketogenic diet, for example, have been studied to try and help manage chronic pain in the setting of altered glucose metabolism. We also know that disrupted lipid metabolism or fat metabolism has been associated, interestingly, with a number of different pain syndromes. And I wouldn't have put together until I was doing more research around this talk specifically, the role of disrupted lipid metabolism in low back pain, partly through the contribution of atherosclerosis and then poor vascular health, which then contributes to increased chronic pain. So it's from a nutrition standpoint, when we start to think about blood sugar control, lipid control, obesity and overweight, all of these metabolic dysregulations are actually quite important to how we experience chronic pain. And then interestingly, there are a number of epigenetic factors which really refer to how genes are expressed without changing the DNA themselves. So we all have obviously the DNA that we're born with, but epigenetic really means how those genes are turned on and off. And we know that there are a number of dietary factors that can contribute to gene expression, including omega-3s, antioxidants like polyphenols, which have the capacity then to downstream modulate the immune system and affect how these genes are turned on. So there's a number of mechanisms really that demonstrate the link between nutrition and chronic pain. And I think we'll continue to deepen our understanding around that over the next coming years. I'm keeping a little eye on the comments in the chat, and I can kind of see them rolling in. I'm going to leave a few of those to the very end, and so we'll try and come back to those a little bit more towards the end. And I left lots of time for that today. So how do we use nutrition, knowing that it can impact the development of chronic pain and the propagation of chronic pain? I think it's also logical to ask, is there something that we can do from a nutrition standpoint that will play a role in alleviating our pain or in part of our big picture management strategy for pain? And indeed, there is emerging literature on this. So first of all, we want to think about pro-inflammatory diets versus anti-inflammatory diets. And we know that anti-inflammatory diets, which are very rich in nutrients and food with anti-inflammatory type properties, have been shown to reduce chronic inflammation and have a number of different epigenetic impacts, which likely reduce inflammation and the development of chronic pain. And these can be overall eating, healthy eating patterns, or they may be very specific interventions such as intermittent fasting, for example, all of which essentially result in improved metabolic profiles, which are anti-inflammatory. So one of the most important things we can do when we look at the chronic pain literature from nutrition standpoint is maintain a healthy body weight, which is always easier said than done. I know it's something that a lot of us have to really work at, but there are a number of different mechanisms through which increasing body weight affects chronic pain, and so it's an important consideration as we move along. Nutritional interventions that help us to manage our weight have been shown to overall reduce chronic pain, not just in musculoskeletal type of conditions like osteoarthritis, for example, but also in fibromyalgia and in chronic abdominal pain or visceral pain patterns. And this results partly in reduced joint loading. And it's also really cost effective when we look at all the interventions that we use from a chronic pain management strategy. So healthy eating habits that are generally very nutrient dense and nutrient rich help to maintain a healthy body weight. So lots of fruits and vegetables, a focus on whole grains, with reduction in foods that generally tend to be more pro-inflammatory has been shown as a general factor across the medical literature. Dietary patterns, which are really, part of just the society that we live in, as opposed to, really a sort of personal choice type of thing. I mean, it's really a reflection of our food patterns and what's available to us. Have been shown to have an impact on chronic pain. So, diets that are really high in quality in terms of lots of fruits and vegetables, for example, and whole grains and whole foods rather than more processed foods have been shown to improve a variety of different chronic pain disorders. Gut health and chronic pain certainly is a hot topic. Dietary strategies for gut health that generally reduce carbohydrates, for example, like a lower FODMAP diet, can also result in less triggering of abdominal pain, gas, and bloating, as well as limiting triggering foods like caffeine and alcohol, and for some people, certain spicy foods. And then dietary strategies for GI disorders. Fiber is incredibly important, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides. It's one of the most anti-inflammatory type strategies that we can do. But for some people with irritable bowel and chronic abdominal pain, fiber, as we've talked about, can cause gas and bloating, and that might further induce pain. So it's certainly something to think about if you have chronic abdominal pain or chronic gut health issues. And certain people, again, may need to limit certain foods depending on their gut symptoms. And I haven't really focused this talk around gut health specifically today, but certainly elimination strategies may be helpful for some individuals. When we look across the board at dietary strategies in general, diet strategies that are plant-based and whole food-based seem to have the broadest and most positive results when it looks at chronic pain. And that likely is through reducing chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. The Mediterranean diet is one of those dietary patterns that tends to be focused on a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, as well as healthy fats and lean and unprocessed meats. And so that strategy has been borne out in the literature, not just in cardiovascular health and outcomes, but also in chronic pain outcomes. And then really thinking about limiting processed foods in terms of their contribution to inflammation and oxidative stress has been shown across the literature, and we look at general guidelines. Antioxidants we know are beneficial because they have a number of different effects. They help to fight free radicals. They also help to support our natural immune function. They've been shown to improve longevity and delay aging through a variety of mechanisms, and also reduce chronic inflammation. So an antioxidant-rich strategy, which again really tends to be very plant-based and whole food-based in its nature, is important when we look across a variety of different diseases. This really comes from that whole rainbow of fruits and vegetables with a real, again, abundance and diversity of fruits and vegetables. This really is one of the key elements that we need to take home when we look across diet strategies. And we also know that having about 30 grams of fiber per day, so really aiming to consume a lot of dietary fiber through, again, whole grains, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, has been shown to have quite an anti-inflammatory um, properties, and also is very important from a digestive health standpoint. So this really is probably one of your biggest allies in reducing inflammation and achieving digestive health. And there's so many um, additional antioxidants that come when we have a really plant-based whole food dietary strategy. So it is probably one of the keys across the literature. Looking at getting healthy fats has also been shown to be, generally speaking, very important. Um, Oily fish, for example, salmon is a good example that has a lot of omega-3 fats in it. And then again, plant-based sources, things like flaxseed, are really important sources for getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. And certainly, probably one of the best quality sources for getting omega-3s is through plant-based sources. Other types of monounsaturated fats and healthy fats like olive oil or avocados, for example, the oil that's in walnuts has anti-inflammatory properties through a number of different phytochemicals, but they also, because they're part of a whole food strategy, they also tend to be higher in fiber and other types of antioxidants, which again contribute to that overall antioxidant, anti-inflammatory dietary state. When we look at protein consumption, there's a variety of different dietary patterns that have looked at the role of dietary protein. We know protein is so incredibly important for musculoskeletal health. Muscles kind of what gets you out of bed in the morning and keeps you going. And it's important in terms of a reduction in frailty and improvement in mobility and things like that, which we know are associated with better outcomes in chronic pain as well. The literature is not entirely clear on how much protein to eat from a pain management standpoint. There's some literature that looks at a very plant-based dietary strategy, very low in animal type protein as a good strategy, and that has been borne out in certain studies. And then other studies have looked at specific protein supplementation, and some of it may be more related to animal protein. And so the jury's still out around that to some degree, whether your protein source is plant-based or animal-based, and it's a bit of a controversial area in the literature for sure. But in general, we do know that a plant-based strategy for dietary protein does give you the benefit of having a lot of other fibers and micronutrients, which tend to be quite anti-inflammatory. So your plant-based strategy for protein, again, is probably a good one from a chronic pain standpoint. Now, I have had a few questions about what about things like spices or turmeric, ginger, other type of dietary strategies, and in general, these type of foods have been shown to have important chemical properties, which tend to be anti-inflammatory and support healthy immune function. They've also been associated with reduction in joint inflammation and pain, as well as good outcomes from a gut health perspective. So there is a small body of literature that supports using these types of spices for overall chronic pain management. But I think one of the key here here is thinking about how we achieve that, not through supplementation, but just part of our day-to-day healthy eating practices. So thinking about incorporating lots of different types of spices into our daily practices and how we cook our food probably gets us the most benefit and the most variety in terms of different types of phytochemicals or phytonutrients that have important anti-inflammatory effects. So I don't have specific recommendations about, one supplement here or there, because again, it really depends on what uh, disease state or illness is being studied, because the dosing is a little bit different, and the outcomes of studies are a little bit different. But again, in general, when we look across a whole pool of literature, it seems that these type of spices are more part of a broad anti-inflammatory type, antioxidant type strategy. What about supplements and micronutrients? And again, this has been studied in different types of pain, and in general, we know that having sufficient vitamin D, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin B12, and antioxidants have all been shown to be important for different chronic pain outcomes. But again, it really depends a little bit on the literature in terms of specific dosing. So it's part of that overall management strategy, as opposed to a specific recommendation in terms of numbers for any one of these micronutrients, because everyone's a little bit different depending on their underlying medical illness. But we can say that if we look across the literature, all of these nutrients have been shown to be important in terms of chronic pain management. I can see a whole bunch of comments and questions coming up along in here, and I can't read them fast enough as I'm talking, so I'm sure we'll come back to them as we go along.
Yeah, let me know if you want me to just pop in with a couple.
Yeah, sure, we certainly can.
Okay, why don't we just take
Yeah.
take a couple? The first one I want to get to is to swing back to magnesium. The that question that came through around different types of magnesium,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
see, I take a variety of these depending on what I'm doing and what I need. Is there a problem for long-term strategies? Takes about 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day.
Yeah, so magnesium is one of those things that I think is really kind of having a moment when we look at social media and sort of nutrition information right now. And I'm not quite sure what precipitated that, but certainly we're reading a lot about it. There is some debate in the literature around the degree to which the population is, in general, is magnesium deficient, and whether or not we should be getting more. And in general, we do get most of our magnesium needs met through green leafy vegetables, nuts, and seeds, again, through that plant-based eating strategy. And then we can take magnesium supplements, certainly, for a variety of different conditions. And when it comes to the type of magnesium that you take, because there are a number of different formulations out there, the answer is that it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So magnesium that you take as a laxative will be a different formulation than magnesium that you might take for muscle relaxation or for sleep, for example. And so that would depend on its absorption. So in general, if you're using magnesium as a laxative, you want it to be poorly absorbed. So I think I mentioned this before, some of the cheaper old-fashioned formulations that are poorly absorbed is what gives magnesium that osmotic effect, which allows it to be a great osmotic laxative because it helps to pull water into the bowel. Some of the newer formulations have better absorption, and that probably makes them better when it comes for managing things like headache pain, for example, muscle relaxation, neuropathic type pain. So the formulation for magnesium, there's many different out there. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And so for the vast majority of us, again, like whole food rather than a supplement, most of us can achieve our magnesium needs in all likelihood. Yeah, so magnesium, there's such a huge variety out there. I generally would consider it a very safe supplement. The chances of getting high or excessively high magnesium levels are really in those who have chronic kidney disease or renal insufficiency. So, if you have chronic kidney disease, that's really where we need to be most cautious of magnesium supplements. And so speaking with your specialist and just keeping an eye on that would be important. But for the vast majority of us, magnesium really is a very safe supplement to use and okay to use long term, I would say.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering that too.
Yeah.
I like this question because is there an easy to use FODMAP diet plan? Like the original is very difficult to follow.
Yeah, yeah. So, oh gosh. Well, you know what? We're gonna do an IBS night at some point for this group, and we'll certainly dive into FODMAPs there. Um,
Okay.
FODMAP is complicated. It's difficult to do. So my recommendation, just sort of a quick recommendation is to look at Monash University, MONASH, as a guide. They're kind of the originators of the low FODMAPs diet. It is quite complex, and a lot of people I think would benefit from working with a registered dietitian around that, just because there's it's a lot of work. But we'll dive into it. I think on another day, because that could take me that could take a while.
That's like a webinar in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some great comments. Just reading through some of them, and I'm just going to skip down to a question here from Mark. Good friend of mine, Dr. David Harper, wrote the definitive book on keto diet. And I support all of this. So here's the question, are there any particular foods, drinks, ingestion of any sort that are associated with adding to inflammation?
Yeah, like most of the stuff in our groceries, to be honest with you, like things that add to inflammation are processed foods, high fat foods, sugary foods, alcohol, saturated fats, like that whole cluster of things that we know we ideally would try to avoid, but our society, I mean, our food system is quite abundant in them, so it's not a blame thing. It is the nature of our food system. Those types of things are generally inflammatory, and we look at an anti-inflammatory strategy. It tends to be whole foods, very low in processed, low in saturated fat, low in salt. That's anti-inflammatory. There's a lot of debate in the literature around intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, vegetarian, those type of very specific strategies. And it depends partly on what type of pain syndrome we're looking at. And it also, the literature is actually quite variable. So there's some great books out there that make very convincing arguments. When we really start to dig into the literature, it's actually pretty muddy waters. Beyond saying that we know that if we really choose to be anti-inflammatory in our diet strategy, that across different types of pain probably has the most benefit.
That's really good to know. Just that seems like a pretty sure path people can take. I'm just as guilty even knowing all of this, and I'll still leave Costco with with a cart full, with processed foods. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
convenience apparently.
It is. It's reality. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like this question again from Mark. Has there been any DNA-based studies that identify propensities for certain DNA profiles to correlate with specific food intakes to reduce pain? So looking at DNA and specific recommendations for food intake.
Yeah, there's lots, and there's a comment below that around methylation, and really what we're
Oh,
talking about is how food and nutrients, the things that we eat, actually um, essentially turn on or off genes and regulate genes. So it's not so much that it changes the DNA; it changes how the genes are expressed. And there's a ton of literature around nutrition and epigenetics. It's actually a really, really fascinating area. And certainly we know it's very important from a pediatric standpoint. That's probably where we see most of the literature is around pediatrics and how pediatric diet and dietary exposures influence health outcomes much later in life through epigenetics. So I and in terms of pain, gosh, I haven't seen a lot of specific data around that, Mark, to be honest with you, but it's a pretty deep dive into the literature, and I have no doubt that you could find those things. And again, I think that the general recommendation or advice is that when we're exposed, even young, but throughout the course of our lifetime, to really anti-inflammatory diet strategy, that's the safe one from a genetic standpoint.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, there's so much to sift through. Um, Here's a question that I'd wondered too. What about dairy, yogurt, cheese, milk?
Yeah. Also controversial. There are proponents of dairy in terms of how important that is in terms of receiving probiotics. There's certain types of fats in dairy that are felt to be anti-inflammatory, like CLA and certain amino acids. So there is some literature that can be anti-inflammatory. There's also literature that tells us that a diet that's very high in dairy tends to be high in fat and less antioxidant, or sort of more pro-inflammatory. And so certainly there's a pool of literature out there that would also advocate being dairy free. So it's a little bit of a controversial area. And I think that we'll continue to see that evolve. Certainly when we look from a lifestyle medicine pool of literature, that generally would advocate minimizing.
It's so interesting. It sounds also so like individual, and just going back up here to a question from another, or a statement, a comment from another Mark. I journal my food intake, and I'm able to tell myself what triggers my pain and inflammation. I've learned what foods to stay away from and what foods I can get away with. And it sounds like it almost comes back to that, without getting too, just to know that there's this really strong connection, and you can have a big impact, an impact at least, on your pain, and to try to figure out what's going to work for you individually without getting too stressed.
Yeah. Well, I
Okay,
think
that's
it's a great comment. Like, I think it's important to look at all of this sort of with broad strokes, because I know I'm talking to about 50 people tonight, and other people may see this video, and so we want to think about what can we generally all be doing that we know is a good, safe strategy, and that really is whole food, plant-based, antioxidant rich strategy. That is a good one. And it's not just for pain, it's for a lot of other disease states. Then when we look at specific conditions, for example, if you're looking at fibromyalgia compared to headaches, compared to post-cancer pain syndromes, those all have slightly different, arthritis, those all have slightly different bodies of literature looking at different individualized strategies. And so you have to dig a little bit for your specific condition. But I think that that concept of journaling your pain compared to your intake is extraordinarily important. Certainly in IBS, I really, really strongly recommend it, because
Mm.
the only way to really figure out what your triggers are for your pain is pattern recognition. To see over and over and over again if something is worsening your pain or making it better. And I don't think that we can figure that out without some kind of record keeping. So, we really can't modify what we don't have data for. So I think journaling is really critical, probably for all of us when we're trying to figure that out. It's a great comment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to keep track. And, Valerie said something that's an interesting comment too. I believe we could figure out an optimum diet for an individual's body. It could mitigate or avoid the results of 99.99% of illnesses, and not
Yeah.
just pain.
Yeah.
Like the power of nutrition, of what we eat.
Yeah. Well, nutrition is interesting because we really are going to see more and more personalized approaches. And when we get to that level of personalized medicine, I think things are going to be really interesting. And it's true for gut health and gut microbiome, which we've talked a little bit about. But there's probably, when we look at whether some individuals do better with plant-based eating, or some do better with more protein, for example, I think a lot of that probably is going to be very individualized when we get to the stage of having the sort of the technology and the application for that kind of stuff. So for sure, stay tuned on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a question about foods from Paul, foods for acid reflux. And again, I'm thinking, just from my own experience knowing people with acid reflux, that also seems to be like there's a general, and then there's also individual quite differences.
Yeah, exactly. So, in general, foods that relax the lower esophageal sphincter will allow reflux to occur more easily, because those stomach contents are going to reflux back up into the esophagus. So things that worsen acid reflux are things like alcohol, caffeine, spices, high fat foods in general, all tend to do that. And then the meal size itself. So a larger meal is going to distend the stomach and make you more likely to reflux. And within that, certain individuals will have additional triggers. For example, some people will say to me, spices are always problematic, or tomato-based foods or citrus foods bother them. And that's where there's sort of a little bit of individualization that comes in. And again, I think journaling is one of the best ways to figure that out. And probably you need to journal because you're looking for patterns and pattern recognition with, correlating your food to your symptoms. And I think you need to journal for a good long time, to be honest with you, like probably in the order of 8 to 12 weeks to really start to get a handle on things, because we eat differently every day. So pattern recognition takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going back here to one question that I missed back here, that I really know nothing about this, so I'll ask you. I've just started doing research on how prostaglandins may correlate with lipids. It would be nice if some basic info could be shared tonight.
Omega-3s are your friend.
Omega-3s are your friend,
Omega-3s.
Valerie.
That's what really is going to change prostaglandins and arachidonic acid production. And so if we're steering towards omega-3s rather than omega-6 or omega-9s, then that really is what changes prostaglandin production, which definitely has been shown to have an impact on pain pathways and on chronic inflammation. So omega-3s for the win.
Omega-3s for the win. All
Omega-3s
right.
for the win.
That sounds pretty clear. Yeah. And maybe we'll take one last question here before we wrap up for tonight. Sandra's asking, Yeah, I'm wondering if the quality of the food versus the specific focus on different ways of eating can have an impact. Focusing on whole foods, quality meats, or is this just reiterating? I'm assuming like organic foods. Yeah.
Yeah, I think quality definitely matters. Now, organic versus inorganic, there's some debate in the literature around that, but I do think quality matters in general. When we're looking at whole food, plant-based eating, we want things that are the least refined as possible, the least processed as possible. Um, not just for pain, but when we look at cancer and cardiovascular outcomes and all that kind of stuff, it really does tell us that quality matters. So I think it's an important point, because it probably is where some of the debate around, only plants or how much animal protein to include or ketogenic or fasting, all of it, the thing that they share in common, all of those diet strategies is quality.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. I'm just thinking, I know there are some, I'm thinking also about like the cost of food. Just it seems to be like increasing. And there are some resources that I know of that in the Okanagan area where you can buy lower cost or get lower cost meals. And so I'll try to find that and then send it out with the email as well.
Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments there. Yeah, and it's true. Like food has there's a lot to how we eat in terms of our budget. There's ethics and all kinds of beliefs come into motivating how people eat, and so that's why I think in general, when we look at strategies, we want to look at broad strokes. What do all of those things share in common? That we know have positive outcome. And in general, we know it's a very anti-inflammatory, whole food based strategy. And interestingly, it probably minimizes supplements. And I knew I'd get like a lot of questions around specific supplements, for example, to use. And actually, when we look at food, whole food has like this complex matrix of vitamins, minerals, fiber, antioxidants, and phytochemicals that work together. And so when we look at the literature, whole food strategies generally have even better outcomes than supplement strategies. They have more fiber associated with them. We're less likely to have overconsumption or to have toxicities with certain things. That's more cost effective. And when we look at epidemiologic data, whole foods actually have better outcomes than supplements. So I know there's a lot of supplements out there, and people always have questions about them. But again, when we're looking at broad strokes, a whole food strategy wins over a supplement-based strategy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, some of those supplements can get very expensive too. Um, Paul, I think frozen blueberries are one of those across the board things if that are antioxidant and are good to throw into your diet,
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. And somebody left a comment about income, and yeah, there's no question that has gosh, and more over the last couple of years, the impact of cost is a huge issue for sure.
Yeah, Sarah, as in the Urban Harvest Okanagan has a Friday grab box for a reduced price, organic local veggies and fruits. And I have a couple more resources like that I'll send out with the recording.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's so important.
Great. Okay, we'll take one last one. I just checking the time here. Loving all these comments that everybody's sharing. There's a lot of good info in here. Paige House, I've heard that in Canada it's not possible to get this is a good question. It's not possible to get enough vitamin D without supplementation in Canada. Is that true?
I don't think necessarily. I think lots of us are able to get sufficient vitamin D But it's true, like you do need to have a certain amount of exposure to the sun. Usually, hands and face without any sunscreen is felt to be enough for most people if they're outside and active on a daily basis. Having said that, the risk of vitamin D deficiency in northern climates, is very, very well documented, and Canada is no exception to that. So, vitamin D is interesting because we always used to think about it in terms of bone health, but we know that it actually does far, far more than that. Certainly important in immune regulation in a variety of different processes. So, and we don't routinely measure vitamin D levels to get it covered. You either need to pay for it or have a malabsorptive type condition. So I generally recommend 1 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D for the vast majority of people, and some people a little bit more. But yeah, I think it's one of the few things that's actually a good insurance policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that too. Thanks for the question. Okay, well, we are ready to wrap up here our 4 weeks on gut health. And I really want to thank Dr. Sarah for being here with us for the month of April, and also to everyone who has showed up consistently. It's quite amazing for 4 weeks, and added your questions and your comments and your experiences in the chat. It just makes the whole discussion richer and relevant to your own experience. So thank you so much. Mark, do you want to end us off and then we'll pass it back to Sarah?
Yeah, I can't really add to that. I mean, I think it's been fantastic. It's been really informative. Yeah, I mean, we spoke a little bit about magnesium. From my personal experience, I think magnesium, whether glycinate or bisglycinate, gets well absorbed as opposed to citrate.
Yep, agreed.
It's a little bit more expensive, but if you're using it for pain or muscle health, then glycinate or bisglycinate is a reasonable option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just 2 cents worth on magnesium.
I agree.
I think, but magnesium and vitamin D are some of those supplements that are well worth. I think bang for your buck. It's probably one of the few that are really worth doing. Maybe a B complex, but definitely magnesium and D.
Yeah, and hard to get too much of them. So
yeah, the magnesium is very self-limiting in that way. So have too much, we'll have diarrhea. Won't absorb. Really easy.
You'll know. You'll know if you've overdone it.
Exactly. What do you mean, doctor? Well, you'll discover very quickly. But yeah, I from the pain world, that was something I got from a PhD dietitian who gave us advice about magnesium, and some patients have found it really helpful. So about 2 cents worth on that. But other than that, it's been a wonderful series. Thank you, Sarah. You've had so much really useful and relevant information that is applicable to all of us. It's been really, really applicable. So yeah, thanks very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been so interesting. It's been great.
Sarah, I wanted to ask you about that last QR code that I saw go up there. Maybe I could get the resources from you, or get the QR code so I can send out any info.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pass that along to you, and then I'll probably put some extra resources up on the website in the next few weeks too, just related to some of these slides and things like that. So I'll try and get them out to you, and you can share them with your audience.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, if everybody,
Thanks,
can visit with Dr. Sarah at Sunday, wellsunday.com or .org.
Okay. Oh, .com.
It is. I don't know why I keep on thinking .org. Wellsunday.com. And I'm hoping that she will join us back before the summer, maybe in June. I'll just put that out there for a talk specifically on IBS. So I'll follow up with you on that, Sarah.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.